Hi, this is Pete Bloom, bringing you another episode of the Veteran Connections podcast, where my mission is to help transitioning veterans and veterans already out of the military engage with the business community, and to share the knowledge and the tools needed to successfully start a business. The Veteran Connections podcast brings you experience and advice from fellow veterans who are business owners and have made the transition from the military and into the business community. There are veterans transitioning out of the military every day. Some of them have an idea or a passion that they want to turn into a business. Having the right connections can be the one thing that makes the difference between a success or a failure. In this Veteran Connections podcast, I will be talking to veteran business owners about what steps they are taking, the hurdles they have ran into, what advice they have for you, and what they hope life will look like in a few years from now. With these real-life interviews and real-life results, you can gain the expert knowledge from those that have been there, from your military brothers and sisters. Today's guest is on the front line of helping veterans with translating their military experience into civilian language and making a bulletproof resume. He's an Army veteran and believes in giving back to veterans and their families. He served 21 years and retired as a major. He's the founder and CEO of Battlefield Resumes. I would like to welcome Bruce Benedict. Bruce, thank you for serving, and how are you doing today?
Just great. Thanks. Thank you for having me on this podcast.
So Bruce, you served 21 years in the military, right out of high school. And during your career, you went from enlisted to an officer. So tell me how it all started and what your career in the military was like.
Well, I had enlisted way back when I was a junior in high school, actually, and knew I had wanted to serve. Like a lot of retired military guys, from the day you're born, you know you want to serve. And for me, it's the same thing. Grew up in high school, always wanted to serve, signed up early, went in right after high school as an enlisted, as an E1, did my time, did about 10 years. Then I decided to go to OCS, and then after that, might as well be a lifer, right? So I ended up retiring after 21 years.
I actually went in right out of high school too, so we have that in common, except it sounds like you were already interested in it like a year before I was. But when I was a senior, I graduated early in January instead of June, and my best friend talked me into going in the military, so it was really his idea, but I was like, oh yeah, then I won't have to listen to my parents tell me what to do anymore, so I thought it was great. And by the time I went through boot camp and my school, I was overseas when everyone else graduated in June. So I thought it was great.
Yeah, absolutely. And back then, everyone would come back with a new car, right? And it was just one of those good things that, not a lot of people were hiring when I was getting out of high school. So you either went to college or you went into the military. And so I went into the military at the ripe old age of, 17, 18, I guess. I went straight overseas. My time overseas was about 3 countries. I spent most of my time overseas, actually. So we spent time in Germany, 3 years, Panama, Japan, and a couple tours in between in the States, a couple deployments at that.
And what was your job when you were enlisted and when you were an officer?
So when I was an enlisted guy, I came in as a engine mechanic on helicopters, and that was a 68 Bravo at the time. So, I'm on the flight line in Germany. It's freezing. It's cold, this and that. I'm like, there's got to be something else. So I applied to the counterintelligence field because in aviation where I was, you just couldn't get promoted. And so back then, I kind of decided it's got to be a strategy to this. There's got to be something, right? And so my strategy focus started all the way back then because I would see E4s who were E4s for 9 years. I mean, they couldn't get promoted in that aviation career track. And so for me, I was like, well, I don't want to do that. So let's look at the Army Times every month. So I spent 6 months to a year looking at the Army Times, analyzing all the promotion points, and then deciding, okay, these are the 5 that people seem to be getting promoted in. Let's focus on one of those. And that's what I did, and one of them was counter-intel, so I went into the counter-intel field.
Wow, so you've always been really good at analyzing things, you can tell, right?
It's the same method with the jobs nowadays. It's the same thing. Did exactly the same thing when I went to OCS. You're contemplating, what do you do? Do you go warrant officer? Do you stay senior NCO? Do you go commission officer and start over again? So for me, it was a long-term vision, long-term plan to retire as a commissioned officer doing counterintelligence. And what's interesting is when I went into OCS, they actually didn't send me to counter-intel. What they did was they sent me to air defense. And so here's another leap of faith. I go into OCS, I go straight to Fort Bliss as an air defense officer, and then I try to get back. And so I got back, and it's the same strategy. It's just kind of have to have that long-term plan, and it makes all the short-term battles worthwhile. right? You can kind of see through those. So
put in the time to make the right decisions and do the research, and it usually works out a little better for you. And I think that really worked out great for you. Bruce, I see that you're in Stafford, Virginia. Is that correct?
my mailing address is in Stafford. Yes, that's where the business is located. It's all online, though.
When you got out of the military, what base did you get out at?
I got out at Fort Meade in Maryland.
Fort Meade. Okay. See, the reason I asked is I was curious because my last duty station was actually Quantico, Virginia, and I lived in Stafford at the time, so I'm really familiar with the area, and I like it. It was a great little area.
Yeah.
I actually want to get back up there because they built the National Museum of the Marine Corps, and I've never even got a chance to see it yet.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to look at. But it's a great area to get out for transitioning vets. I would always encourage them to get out on the East Coast just because there's so many positions there that are familiar with their military experience.
Now, when you transitioned out of the military yourself, would you say that that was an easy or a hard transition?
Very difficult. It was very difficult. It was unexpected. I actually associate it to a different country. When you deploy, some of us like me, I've deployed numerous times. Iraq, Afghanistan, Bahrain, Qatar. And every time you go into an unfamiliar country and an unfamiliar culture, an unfamiliar environment, it's extremely difficult. However, the way we do it in the military is we use what we were taught, right? And so you go through the analysis process. You have all your staff elements in the battalion and brigade, the commander, all that, the operations order, all of that stuff. And it collectively helps you transition into that unfamiliar environment and work within it. And yeah, so for me, the transition out of the military, I had 21 years in, and when I departed, I was just lucky enough that I was on the East Coast at the time because nothing prepared me for that. I kind of associate it to standing on the end of a cliff. And I hate to say it like this, but for some of us who have transitioned and it wasn't easy, really the analogy for me is I'm standing on a cliff. I've been trained to jump off of it. But at this point, when I give them my ID card, I'm on my own with no parachute. Now, what do you do, right?
Yeah.
I mean, literally, they're helping all the way up to the point in which you turn your ID card in. But I was told that was a surreal moment in time, and it literally was. I was not expecting it. And for me, when I went processed through the out processing and sat there at the desk, and they're like, okay, it's time to give me your ID card, and then I'll give you the retired one. That's a surreal moment because at that point, it's done. It's over. Your past gets you where you're at, but you have to still prove yourself. So it's almost like starting over again with a group of people who don't understand what you've done, so you really can't be supported in that, right? So you have to prove yourself all over again. And so when I transitioned, luckily, I was trying to find jobs. And the resume at the time really wasn't a big deal for me because I thought, well, I'll just give it to the transition assistance program and they'll help me with it. And so when I got it back, it was very generic. And, those guys have an unbelievable task. It's overwhelming. I wouldn't want to do that myself just because they're trying to help all MOSs. And now they're on joint basis. So they're trying to help all services at the same time. So there's no way they're subject matter experts to try to do that. So I looked at it and go, wow, I'm going to have to do this myself. How do I do this? So I started reaching out to prior coworkers that had transitioned. Luckily, those guys were in defense contracting jobs at the time. And so they pulled me in and helped me with all of that. And so that was the lifesaver at that point. It took me 2 years in that job to basically get over the transition experience, which is a long time. But I know that happens for a lot of people because I talk to a lot of retirees and vets, and they all go through the same thing.
Yeah, one thing that I'm noticing, because I'm actually in transition again right now in the business world, is that each time you go through a transition, your skills have changed. You may have moved up compared to what you were doing the last time that you used your resume, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So it's not like you can just dust the thing off and use it again. So I'm going through with meticulous detail trying to get this thing correct so that it really works for me and gets me what I'm looking for. So you went through that process. You really talked to all those people. You kind of, I guess, started becoming an expert at that time on doing resumes. So what was it that actually caused you to start your business?
What's interesting is I ended up getting caught up in the base realignment move, right? The BRAC move. And so during that time, organizations were changing, they were shifting. and I had already retired, and I was in a defense contracting company at the time that I was pulled into. And I had an option to move up in that company, and it just wasn't the right fit for me at the time in my life. And it's really kind of how that works. Very, very stressful because obviously you're a military guy or female, you're a military service member, especially if you've traveled all over the world, you're probably the sole provider of your family. And so now that adds to the stress of your transition. So it's very, very challenging. So during that transition period, it was so unfamiliar that I decided, well, let's go federal government. Here it is, federal defense contracting. Let's go federal government. And I ended up going into the federal government, but I used a certain methodology. I just kind of basically forgot everything that anyone had ever taught me. Because I was like, look, if the military strategy works for foreign countries and the U.S. military, then by God, it's got to work for me and a resume and a job application. So basically, I just forgot everything that people had told me. Because basically, I was told, and I don't know if everyone's told this, but I was literally told by career counselors, if you want a job, Bruce, you're going to have to change your personality. You're going to have to change yourself. You're going to have to change your language in your resume, change everything to civilian. Well, I don't know what that means. I mean, look, I was born to serve, and I went in when I was 17. I spent longer in the military than I did with my mom and dad. All I know is military. And so that's me. And for somebody to tell me in order to get a job, I have to change everything, I kind of took offense to that. And I was like, I'm not going to listen to you guys. I'm going to figure out it myself. And so what I did was I just leveraged the military strategy. When I went and applied for a government job, that organization, because when you do the analysis over a couple years, like during the wars, if you did the analysis of jobs overseas, you could tell which company was actually getting the contracts at what time. And it just ebbed and flowed, and you could basically time it. Okay, you knew the jobs that were coming out. So that's what I really enjoyed doing, and I just monitored that as a hobby. Well, in the government, it's kind of the same thing with the base realignment move. You could tell, and I plotted where everybody was at and where everybody was going, all the organizations throughout the U.S. Well, one organization that I wanted to apply to was moving from Maryland to Virginia, and I knew a lot of the people that were working in that organization, and I knew most of them would not want to move, because they had grown up in Maryland. You know, their spouses get a job, their kids go to school, they don't want to move. So I looked at that as an opportunity. I took all of that and applied and then used that information to negotiate, because you can negotiate with the federal government. And then moved down to Quantico as a government employee, because I got hired, obviously. So I get hired, and at that point, I'm down as a geo bachelor, which 80% of the people at the time were, you know, because of the base realignment move. And at that point, I decided, you know, let's just do what I did. Let me help others do that, because there was a pattern. There's a strategy involved, and it's all military strategy. We're all familiar with it. It's just the reverse. Everyone had told me when I transferred from the military, change everything about you, forget everything you learned, and you're going to have to relearn the civilian world. You're going to have to translate everything you did in the military to civilian language. Well, that's like me translating all my English papers into Chinese. I have no idea what you're talking about, right? So what I did was I went just the opposite. I decided, well, let's take this hiring process, this civilian or this federal hiring process, and let's translate it into military terminology so I can understand it and everybody else can understand it, because that's the language we're used to. So I really just reversed the process, and it worked for me, and that's when I started helping others do it at the same time.
That's really awesome. So you more or less with your company gravitate towards the government and the DoD and that area, right?
Yeah. The whole philosophy really is helping you obtain a job that you want at the highest salary possible. And a lot of people that are in the same market as me, in the same space, will often look at me, obviously, like they do most military guys, and go, "Mal, you're way too confident," you know, that kind of thing, right? You're just overboard. And I look at them and go, this is what you have to do. I mean, we're all military guys, and we have a lot of pride, a lot of energy. And when you move into the civilian space, they don't advertise, the normal civilian job doesn't advertise salary. So it really makes it complicated when a military guy is trying to find, especially a military guy who has supported their family forever. Now you're transitioning. You know the salary that you need. The problem is there's so many jobs out there and none of them have salaries listed. So you really don't even know if the jobs that you're looking at are going to be the right ones. It's a very frustrating situation. So for me, what I do is I say, vets, if you want to make your transition easy, then go into the federal government. And on federal government, what I say is not only the federal government as in a government agency and a federal employee, but defense contracting. Because federal defense contracting is basically working federal government. And they're all familiar with your military background, and they want your military background. There's a lot of those companies who will actually list your MOS in their job announcements. I mean, look, if my entire career was overseas, what does that mean? Well, that means my spouse didn't really have a job. She just bounced around job to job. I'm the sole provider the whole time. We're in the States now. She's trying to start over. The kids are all in school. There's a certain salary level that I have to maintain my family. And that's the reality. All the job searching out there, nothing has job salaries. So how do I know what's available? So I used to be asked all the time, hey, Bruce, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? I'm like, I don't know, man. What's available? What are my options? Because here's a salary level I need to maintain my family and my standard of living. There's pride associated with that. If you can tell me what the salary levels are, then maybe I can tell you which one of those jobs I'm interested in, right? But to tell you that, hey, I'm interested in a million different jobs in the U.S., but none of them come with salaries at the beginning, I don't know until the very end if it's the right job. So that's a huge challenge. Now, in the federal government, though, federal government advertises all their salary levels. So it makes it easy. They have the salaries listed. So you know what you need, what your bottom line has to be, right? So this is the job that I'm going to have. And I can't get anything less than a GS-6 or a GS-9. So it narrows your search. And really, I focus on tailoring and targeting everything. And so the target is basically your salary level. You got to find jobs within your salary level. Well, the assumption is all the jobs you're searching for should have a salary level attached. Federal contracting jobs or defense contracting jobs, every one of those jobs are associated to a government contract. So Booz Allen, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, you go on to any of those, CACI, Leidos, all those guys are government contractors. If you go to Wikipedia defense contractor, you'll see hundreds of these out there. They all have contracts with the government. Their salary structure is based on the salaries indicated in the contract. And you may not be able to find the actual salary number, but what you can find is the levels of salary for defense contracting. So you may have a job that's being announced as a level 1, level 2, level 3. Well, be rest assured, level 3 gets paid more than the level 1. So in level 3 in the job requirements is probably 15 years of experience or more. So if you have that many years of experience or not, right? And it's associated to that level of salary. And so for me, I always focus the transitioning vet on the easiest transition possible to make it less stressful. And that is defense contracting and federal government. And in that way, we just have a focus. Instead of saying, hey, the world, there's no limit. What jobs do you want? I just say, look, let's focus on this. Let's focus on this target right now.
What you're talking about makes such perfect sense. It's almost like, well, why didn't everybody think of that? Why isn't everybody doing that? Because really what you're talking about as a bottom line is exactly what I think we all think about. As you approach the civilian community, people talk about trying to fit in and everything else, but if you can't take care of your family, then it doesn't matter if you fit in or not. You're going to have to keep trying over and over again. And one of the things that I always hear is that people get out of the military and they get into a job, but there's a turnover time of a year and a half because it wasn't the proper fit in the first place. So I really like what you're doing. And now it makes it perfectly clear the reason you have your tagline. I love your tagline, aim accurately at your next career. It makes sense.
Absolutely.
So tell us all about your company's mission. How does it work? How do you do it? How do you apply all that stuff to get to that target that you were talking about?
Yeah, so the whole goal is to identify the target. And the way I associate that is this, is most of the time we were told during our transition that we need to tailor and target our resume. And it's kind of a generic statement. And no one really describes how. And in the military, look, everything that we have ever done in the military is written down. I mean, there's a definition for everything. and there's a manual for everything. So, when you get into the civilian world and somebody says, hey, you need to tailor and target your resume. All right, fantastic. I got a lot of energy. I can do that. Tell me how. Well, I don't really know how. I just know you need to do it. So for me, I looked at it and I go, well, let's define these terms. I'm a military intel officer. Let's define them. Let's use the military definitions. So then there's no translation problem. So what I do is I go, look, the analogy is this. Picture yourself on a range. We all shot numerous times on a range. If I were to tell you, get out on the range, you're going to be qualifying today. Here's your weapon. Look, I use M16s, they're using M4s now, whatever, right? So here's your weapon. It's all zeroed and everything. It's your day to qualify. Go qualify. And you sit on the range, you're in the prone position and you're ready to qualify, but there's no target. It's just a big mound of dirt out there. What's your question going to be? How do I qualify if there's no target? So that's the analogy that I use, right? You have to have a target. And then if I give you a target and I say, okay, here, put the target up yourself. I'm the range safety. And I go, hey, here's the target. And I hand you the target. Say, okay, put the target up and you're going to qualify on that. Well, for one, your qualification impacts everything, right? It impacts your promotions. It impacts everything, badges, all that stuff. And then your first question is going to be, so at what distance am I putting the target up? I mean, is it 50 meter? Is it 300 meter? What is it? To me, the most important piece of the entire process is to identify what the target is. When I help somebody, the first question I always ask is, what job are you looking at? Tell me the job you're looking at right now. Because the resume for me takes on its own personality. And so I normally don't even see a lot of my clients face to face. The resume takes on its own personality for me. And a lot of times it's not the same as the person. It's really interesting because the person is normally very, very humble. But what I'm trying to do is extract all of the stuff they did and put it in the resume so they look like a superstar. The problem is normally the client will look at that resume afterwards and go, look, nobody's going to believe I ever did that. And I go, the only person that's not going to believe that you ever did that is yourself. Everybody else wants to see it. I mean, when you show me the job, and this is one of the reasons I ask people, tell me what job you're applying to. I want to actually see it. What is the job when you look at the millions of jobs out there? What is the one job right there that you're wanting to apply to? And what I do is I look at that job and then I look at the resume and I go, is it the same? Is it the same fit? I'm kind of looking at it from a hiring manager's perspective at that point. And then if it's not, then I look at the client and I go, explain to me, and we're going to go through this line by line, and I want you to explain to me why you think you're qualified for each one of these elements in the job. And then they'll explain it. And then I say, well, your resume doesn't say that. Well, your resume doesn't say that. Well, your resume doesn't say it. Your resume really has to be like your friends. If I were to show your job that you're applying to your friends, your closest friends that you served with, would they tell me that you're qualified for that job? More than likely, yes, absolutely. Well, then whatever they know about you needs to be in your resume. It has to be. So all of the implied tasks that you ever did, all has to be in there. And now what we're trying to do, and especially if it's a contract or a federal contract or the federal government, is we're saying, okay, does your resume or your experience that we're going to put in your resume support this job, or should you apply to something higher? Because we're all humble with what we've done, and we really a lot of times shortchange ourselves. So let's look at this job. Now, is it the right salary level that you're looking for? Okay, now let's try to get the highest salary possible. And how do you do that? It's no different than being on a range. You as the one who zeroed your weapon versus the guy next to you who didn't zero their weapon. Somebody just walks out, fires and forgets. They're not going to have a tight shot group. You, on the other hand, spend the time to zero your weapon, zeroing basically your resume and your job search on that particular target. You're going to have a better shot at it. And it literally works that easily. I really focus it on the job search and the resume and the interview and the negotiation process. So each one has its own target, let's say, right? So for instance, if you come to me and say, well, I don't really have a job that I'm looking at, no problem. Let me get to know you. Let me look at your resume. Let's find something for you. I'm probably going to be looking at federal contracting or federal government because those guys are friendly. It's an easy transition and they have salaries attached. Is that a good salary level for you? If not, we're not even going to worry about it. Let's tighten your shot group. Let's look at another target. So for the job search, that's how it works. You're going to look at certain companies, certain salary levels. Once you find those jobs, and in the government, you're going to find a job series number, which is the whole key to the whole kingdom in the federal government. You're going to find those jobs. Once you find those jobs, that job becomes its own target. And then you start tailoring everything towards that target. That's the philosophy that I work with. It just streamlines the whole process, and it just makes it more intuitive and actually somewhat of a game for us. It's a little more fun.
Wow, it seems very well-rounded. I mean, you're talking about the resume, and then you're talking about the other things that come after that, and you got a target for each. You know, the way you use military tactics and doctrine when applying for civilian jobs, the strategy sounds so good that I could almost see where you could apply what you're doing, not only to someone who's looking for a job, but you could help people that are even trying to start a business to focus on a target in the industry that they're interested in. So the strategy that you have is really great, and I could just see so many applications for it. I don't know if you're thinking about expanding, but you should.
Yeah, the challenge for me is I've been honing in the process for many years, and I ended up putting the books together, the defense contractor civilian resume book, the federal government resume writing book, and the job searching book that encompasses both. And eventually I'm going to get to the interview book and then the networking book. and so those will be really good. But the challenge is trying to expand the assistance. You know how military units would have like organizational days or something where everybody would go into the theater and get the mandatory briefings and things like that. And you're doing that a couple years ahead of time, so everyone's kind of prepared to their transition. For me, hopefully we'll have unit commanders who say, hey, Bruce, come on in, give a theater briefing to these guys to get them prepped. What do they need to do before they even get to TAP? Because it's that preparation time, that strategy ahead of time. With the business piece, it's the same similar process. And I will tell you that one of the most important things in the business side of the house is having, and I hate to say it, but having your own network. And the reason I hate to say that term is because it's another term that we're told over and over and over again, but given no definition for. I can remember transitioning out and everyone says, hey, Bruce, you're going to have to network to get a job. And man, I'm like, all right, fantastic. Let's go. I don't know how to do it. Can you tell me how? So what I did was I was like, okay, now that's the networking for a job piece. But the other networking, and no one really breaks it down, and spends enough time. That's why I really like the career coaching piece of this as well, because no one really breaks it down and says, look, networking is really two different things, and it's a generic word that everybody uses. It's almost like veteran, right? Everyone uses that. Or it's like entrepreneur. What is that? It's a word that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So for the networking piece, for me, I look at it as if you're networking for a job, there's a way to do it. And there's a military way to do it to be very, very successful. If you want to be an entrepreneur, networking in business for me is different. You almost have to change your group of friends when it comes to business. You can have regular personal friends, but your business friends are those who support you in even the worst times because they've been through it too. So they're the ones who you can call up and say, how do I build a logo for my company? It's easy questions that no one ever talks about. How do I get a domain name? Out of all the different website programs, which one should I use? I mean, everyone's telling me I need a website. Okay, tell me which one I should use. But no one wants to step into the endorsing some website, or no one wants to step into the endorsing mode. So you have to have some group that you trust and who trust you, where you can actually just pick up the phone or email them, even if you haven't talked to them in a few weeks, and say, look, is there a CPA or a tax guy I can talk to about this? Because I don't want to wait to the end of the year to figure out how I was supposed to calculate all this stuff. How do you get the Better Business Bureau symbol? How do you get the A+ versus an A-? Bank account, how do I separate my money into a business account so it doesn't get mixed in with my personal account? Which bank am I supposed to go to? How do I register my business, or even should I register it, or is it still a hobby? If I register it, how do I do that? What's the paperwork? Do I go to LegalZoom, or do I just do it on my own? These guys are your network, and they are willing to help you. Now, what I've found is these guys have done the same thing, and most of them that I know that are in my network are all vets too. So they know. They've already went through those trials and tribulations. Literally, when you own your own business, you actually work a lot more than an 8-hour-a-day job. You're working weekends, holidays. It's a lot of extra work. But these guys have already gone through that, and they're the ones who They're going to ask you for stuff and you're going to ask them for stuff. And it's a quid pro quo relationship and very loyal relationship. And it really reminds me of the camaraderie we had in the service. That right there, you just have to maintain at all costs because it keeps you moving through all the bad points in business. For an example, I was talking to somebody who's transitioning and they want to start their own business. And a really good group of people had asked this person to build something for them, like a sign or something. And his question was, what should I charge for my sign? And it's a very important question, right? So pricing is a very important question. And it's very difficult because a lot of us, like myself, we've changed prices throughout the years to figure out what price works for the target audience. Again, target, right? Audience. If you're just starting out, you may not have the money to go through that. So how do you decide? Well, this network of people, your camaraderie of people, your network, those guys you can talk to. And a lot of times you're going to do a lot of free stuff for them. They're going to do a lot of free stuff for you. But that loyal network will push you over the hump every time. And you'll get a lot of referrals from them too. That's kind of how that mission and the networking and all that stuff kind of comes together. I tell you, that's very critical to have that.
Bruce, I'll tell you, I've been promoting networking for a long time. I tell the transitioning vets all the time that they need to build a network. And I usually say what that means is getting to know the industry, getting to know people in the industry. But I'll have to say, you broke it down with a series of a dozen or so questions that I've never even thought of. So you really have brought more meaning to the word network than I think that I've ever expressed. So that is such super valuable information because a lot of those questions, I would say, yes, somebody starting a business, they absolutely have to have those answers. So right there, with that network of business people, they can get all those answers. That's definitely some incredible knowledge and ideas of things that they could ask. Now, for you specifically, you started up your business after you got out. You decided it's what you wanted to do. You have to take steps like some of the things that you mentioned, domain name and stuff, but what steps did you take to actually get up and running?
I think probably it's unfamiliar to get into a job in the civilian world. It's even more unfamiliar if you're trying to be an entrepreneur in the civilian world. And I'll say only because I don't think we were really taught anything about being an entrepreneur or capitalism when we went through junior high, high school, or college. It literally is how our country runs. But it's the one thing that the majority of us are never taught how to do. Here I am, 40-something years old, trying to do this. Very, very frustrating. And so the number one step for me was getting my process down. Because my process, unlike a franchise, my process I had to basically create. And then I had to define it. And so, it started out as a hobby. But I've done so many seminars, the podcast, clients, and really the whole effort is trying to get this process down. And then what I ended up doing to confirm the process. And so what I ended up doing was I worked with so many people individually on this, just one-on-one, on the resume writing, job searching, things like that. Because initially when I started, I just did job searching. Then after that, I did resume writing. And then I combined everything. The challenge is, all right, so how do you define and list all of this stuff out? So what I started doing was I put the headset on basically on every snow day that we had. For a couple years, I put the headset on and I just talked about the process that I would go through with clients. And that's how I put my books together. It's because I had to get it out of my head and on the paper in some method that was like step-by-step method. It's very easy to talk about a process because you can talk about simultaneous things happening simultaneously, right? But when you write it in a book, it has to be kind of linear. So you have to figure out what comes first, right? The chicken or the egg. There's a definite first. So I wrote the books so I could put all that stuff out. And I still use those. They're like my workbooks. And then I put together a video program on Udemy that walked through the entire process. And literally the video program is just an extension of the book, the Federal Resume Writing book. And so after doing all that, then I was like, I've got the process down. After that, then now I'm going into the certification piece. And so I started doing resume writing certifications. And for me, what I really love doing is everything that I do is live. For instance, whenever I do a webinar, I try to do a live webinar. Whenever I do a certification, it's all live, and meaning we're going to work on a live resume with a current open job that you are actually going to apply for right now. So you're going to ask me what the questions are you have that are relevant to right now. And I should be able to answer those. That's the challenge that I have. I like doing it because I should be able to answer those based on the method and the process I've put in place. But that's how I learn. So if there's something that confuses each other in the method, then it's a concern of mine. Right now, I haven't found that. And the definitions are pretty sound. And I think they're sound just because I've used military methods and military definitions. To me, that's the most important piece. Once you have that process, you can relate it to franchise and everything. They have a process. And before they move to franchise their business, that process is locked in. So it can be repeatable. And so at that point, you can negotiate.
You talked about like when you got out personally and people would tell you had to do this and you had to do that. And you said, I threw it all away and I went with what I learned in the military, basically. And you kind of did things reverse so that they made sense. And now what you're saying, I find it so interesting because you're talking about the process of what needs to get done. So obviously people have an idea of what they want to do when they start a business. You're talking about what's the process to get there. And then what I really like that you said is you wrote it all down and made it linear and you put it in books. And now I'm sitting there thinking about the military on top of this whole thing of how we're putting it together. Those books are the technical manuals, and that's what we're used to from the military. So it really does make perfect sense. And then not to mention that as a civilian writing books, or even if you're still in the military and you decide to write books, I mean, those books can be sold for profit. That's income or revenue right there. So that's great.
Yeah, and so it's interesting because the books that I wrote, I don't go step by step. I go objective by objective. And the books are scenario driven, kind of, sort of, right? Basically small unit tactics. So for instance, what you'll see is a battlefield with phase lines. And it's objective. You got to accomplish these objectives before you move across the phase line into the next objectives. And you actually have a target at the end, and it's a high value target, and there's a perimeter. It's no different. It's very, very familiar. So I've just basically taken that battlefield and just overlaid it on top of the hiring process and say, look, you've got to accomplish these objectives before you cross over into another phase line. For most of us, I don't have to describe what a phase line is. I don't have to describe what boundaries are. But, I can just say, look, here's the process for your target. So you're in one platoon. I'm in another platoon. You're in first platoon. I'm in second platoon. We have two separate targets. We're right next to each other, but there's a boundary line in between the platoons, right? So you have your target. I have my target. Guess what? The terrain on both of those lanes are different. They're not the same. So you do your troop leading procedures or operations order. I do mine. The operations order is going to be similar, but it's going to be different because the terrain's different. Your target is different. My target's different. So to me, the operations order and, like I said, zeroing your weapon, that literally is the resume. You're not going to use a same operations order for every mission. That would be ludicrous. You're going to use a different operations order for every target, for every mission, even if the mission is next to each other. Even if you are in first and I'm in second platoon and we're operating next to each other, your terrain is going to be a little different than mine. The operations order is going to be slightly different. It's just tweaked. That is your resume, right, that you're looking at for the target, but you got to have the target and you got to have your boundary lines, step by step, basically objective by objective, and then cross over. Now it's another phase of the operation. And then you finally get to the end. How do you fire upon the high value target? It's all military methods, but it's all related to obtaining a job.
With all the strategy that you've used into putting everything together and figuring out your process, it just seems like that it all would flow together naturally. So I'm thinking, in starting the business and doing everything that you've done, have you run into any challenges? But I'm not sure that you have, considering how organized you've been with the whole process.
Not really any challenges. Probably the only challenge is the unbelievers or the non-believers. And so basically you're talking people who have helped veterans for years and years and years who have no military background. are literally the only challenge, because there's a certain method that they've used and feel is successful, and that's fine. What I tell everybody is, if you embrace this and you have no military background whatsoever, you're going to learn military language so you can better discuss the civilian employment process with your veteran. And I'll give you an example. There's a retired Air Force special agent who was on the East Coast, a friend of mine, and he was applying to a job on the West Coast. He basically had an interview that he was flying to. And so what he did was, obviously, he found out who was going to interview him. Simultaneously, as he was doing this, his wife, I was working with his wife on her resume for a position in that new area. So I said, hey, here's my books, read the books, and let me help you with your resume. This will help, back and forth. So as he's going through his process and she's going through that process of mine, he starts looking up the interview panel members that he suspected were going to be interviewing and found that they had written papers. I mean, this is the analysis you do, right? These are the papers. This is the thought process of the interview panel. This is the way they think about things. And so that helped him when he went to his interview. He came back and he said, Bruce, it's funny because when I was talking to my wife about this interview, she says, oh my gosh, that's the high value target.
Nice.
And she started talking in military terms to him. And he's like, where'd you get all that from? Because he understood it. She never did. Bruce's book, it's all there. He's associated. Everybody you're talking about, he's labeled, put these labels and this mission focus on it. And it's easy to understand. And now they could actually have a conversation that both of them understood. And so the only challenge I have is those who kind of push back on the military, but they would push back on the military anyway. But, some of them, if they embrace it, man, it would help so much in their discussions with the veterans. They would realize that most of the veterans are not angry people. They're just frustrated that they've been dropped in the middle of China, basically, to fend for themselves.
So then for non-military, we know that the best thing that they could do is they should read your book. So we'll make sure that we tell them that.
Absolutely, yeah. I tell you, a lot of folks that are not military will look at my books and they'll take offense to the way I've labeled everything. But look, I wrote these books because I've been on both sides of both of these. I've been an applicant to the defense contracting jobs. I've been an applicant to the federal government jobs. And I still apply today. I apply to all kinds of jobs all the time. Okay, if you go on my Facebook, LinkedIn, you'll see I put photos of my USA Jobs referrals. My belief is if I'm not currently getting referred based on my resume to a lot of different jobs, then how can I tell others that they should listen to me? So I go to interviews, I decline jobs, I apply to all kinds of jobs all the time. It just maintains my skills. The problem is a lot of people that are not military somewhat are offended by some of the labels. For instance, having been on both sides, and I was a hiring manager on both sides, defense contracting and federal government, I will tell you that I am the enemy. As a hiring manager, I am your enemy because I am the guy who's got to select you. I'm the guy who's going to interview you, and I'm the guy who's going to give points to you to determine who I want to hire. And in the whole battlefield methodology, that guy has to be your high-value target. Now, it's not a negative term. It's literally meaning that's the end point. Because, once you get to that point, it's over. The whole process is over. That's really what you're trying to get to. And so when I start talking about networking, who are you trying to get close to? And you're trying to get close to the high-value target. It's no different than if you're on a battlefield running sources. You have the whole deck of cards like we had in Iraq. You're trying to get as close as you can to those high-value targets. You may not talk to them, but you're trying to get as close as you can to them and get information and have them either get to know you or you get to know them. And so in networking world, that's one of the methods is go on to LinkedIn. You can go on LinkedIn and find the organization. You can find the job title. You can find the location. And more than likely, what will surface is 10 other people who have served in that same job or currently serving in that job. That is a target. So now try to find people in your own network of LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever who maybe could get you closer to them. Then you network closer to those guys. So if the non-military experienced people embraced that method that we were all taught instead of telling us to embrace the civilian method that they were taught, then we could kind of work collectively together. And so we could sit there, they could converse with us, we could converse with them. No one's taking offense in the terms. It's this battlefield terminology scenario is what it boils down to. Something intuitive that all of us know. That would probably be the only challenge that I think I've ever run into. But the believers who transition and understand that language, man, what a difference when they start talking to their troops that are transitioning. They can relate to them.
Well, Bruce, I'll tell you, so far, just from what I've heard, you've definitely made me a believer. So I'll help spread the word. Let me ask you, what do you think the key to the success of your business is?
I would say it's probably the network of like-minded people that we were talking about. Times ebb and flow. I mean, sometimes you're at the bottom and you're stressed out and you're like, oh, I just want to give up. I want to give up, right? And your military drive won't let you, and you're like, I can do this. I can do this. And you tend to reach out to some of your friends and they're really very protective. So they're going to tell you more than likely, yeah, maybe you need to try something else. But your network of entrepreneurs are going to go, oh, man, it's just a phase. Okay, we can help you get through this. It's that camaraderie thing that you had in the military. You never leave anybody behind, man. Only the quitters get left behind. Basically, if you're still trying, we're going to come back and pick you up. It's like running around base. Somebody's still jogging, but they can't keep up. And so guess what? The entire organization does. They turn around and they pick them up. They pick up the stragglers. And sometimes you're a straggler and sometimes you're the guy turning around to pick the other ones up. And I will tell you that entrepreneur network does that, and it is critical because that's the group of people that keep your motivation up. Everything's always possible. There's always better expectation in the future. And I would say that's probably the biggest key is the conversations you have with those people. The other thing I would say is for my business, I have to have a relationship. It's interesting when I do my certification programs, it's really based on personality. I'm trying to instill the culture of this business into individuals because it's not a fire and forget resume writing business. I don't consider myself, believe it or not, a resume writer. I'm literally like a resume coach. I'm going to show you how to do it so then you can do it on your own. And if you need help, just call me up. And if you want me to do it, I'm always here. But the objective is let me teach you how to fish. So we have to get through that. And then you're building your personality. You're connecting with the client. And it's very compassionate throughout the entire process, all the way from the job search. And I don't have a resume. All I have is an I Love Me book. All your PDF, NCOERs, OERs, awards. All I have is that. Can you help me with that? Absolutely. All the way to job searching, all the way to negotiation, all the way to you sitting in that job now. And so that whole process is lengthy, but you know what? You become very close to the client base and they refer people to you. And if you're trying to save money on advertising, this is the best way to do it in my mind. And for me, it's very gratifying. That's what's really helped for long-term clients and their referrals. And what's also helped is I'm very upfront. I'm truthful and ethical with them. To me, you have to be. There's too many people trying to pick our pockets, selling us a used car. We just don't have the time or money to deal with that. So you kind of have to go with somebody that you can hopefully trust, and you got to build that. And so for me, I tell everybody up front, look, I'm going to be truthful with you, and I'm going to try to push you to the limit. I'm going to push your resume, your jobs, everything to the limit, and then you're going to have to pull it back based on how comfortable you feel, because my objective is to get you the interview and then get you the job. And so if your resume is not up to snuff, I'm going to be up front and tell you that. You got to take the edges off, the military rough edges, so it's more politically correct and friendly. But the objective is, hey, I'm going to tell you the truth, and you can rely on me to tell you that truth because I'm trying to get you better. I'm going to be truthful and I'm going to be ethical. So let's work that. And availability all the time. People can usually text me or call me up and ask me a question. What happens is I tell them, look, as we go through this process, you're going to run through what I call battlefield obstacles. And you may not know how to get through or over those obstacles. It's going to happen. So just contact me, ask me the question, let me get you over that hurdle and obstacle, and so you can keep moving forward. That's basically what I would say the key to the whole success is at that point.
So there were a lot of points in there that you said that I can see 100% why that would help any business owner have a success. You talked about that network of people. They'll turn around and they'll help pick you up. You talked about they'll answer the questions that can give you the answers that you need. And you even said earlier that, your network was basically a bunch of vets. And so that's a community that you already trust. I can see if those people helping you along and picking you up and making sure that you don't quit and give up, that is key. I personally feel that having people on your side that can help you is important, and that's why I do a lot of mentoring. And in my industry, I'll give advice when I can to people that are interested. I go through Veterati, and people can just contact me whenever they want. So what you're saying about a network and having those people there, you really hit the nail on the head, I think. Now, I usually ask people if they're going to help or hire veterans with their company. Well, we already know you're helping veterans because you're kind of dedicated towards that. So I guess the other half of that is, do you see yourself hiring any veterans, or are you more of like a one-man show?
Actually, what I started out doing, the whole vision for the certification process was kind of twofold. And I just say retirees because most of the transition program focuses on prior service, not retired folks. A lot of the headhunter companies focus on junior officers, right, after 3 or 4 or 5 years. So for me, as a retiree, I'm just like, hey, let's just focus on those guys because I can do everybody else, but those guys need to be taken care of too. What I wanted to do was I wanted to create a certification program that was twofold. One, that would help transition coaches and career coaches in the TAP program, Department of Labor, Career One Stops, right, that kind of thing, while they're helping vets. Here's how you can associate the vets, teach the methodology. They'll understand it. It'll make them successful. It'll help them out. And that's one area of the certification program. But the other area of the certification program was really based on listening to most of the retired guys that I know. Because at a certain point, most of us have said, when I retire, I want to retire. We say it twice because it confirms that it's over, right? So, you just don't say it once because that's a military retirement. But when you say it twice, then, hey, that really means I just want to chill out for a while. What I try to do is I try to build this certification program so I could help these retirees or other vets live wherever they wanted to live. Because what I found was a lot of veterans, a lot of retirees, when they were getting out, they would tell me, hey, I just want to do something fun for a while. I'm like burnt out. I've spent 20, 25, whatever years in. I want to move back home. I want to go to the Midwest and move. I want to live in Korea. By the time somebody retires, if they're married to somebody from Korea, a lot of them want to move back. They're married to a German, they want to move back. It's that kind of thing, right? You just kind of want to move back and kind of have a family and a normal life. Some want to move to the middle of the Midwest. Some want to move to the beach. Some don't even want to worry about it. Let me just sit on my boat all the time. I thought, well, let's put a program together where I can certify these retirees to do resume writing anywhere in the world. It's an internet-based business. I could certify them on my methodology, and all they would need, they could literally, the picture in my mind was, here they are, a retired vet, sitting on the beach with a laptop, because we all know, look, no one's going to stop working. Most of all these vets were born to serve. They got the motivation. It's in their mind. Most of us go crazy when we're not doing anything. We have to have a purpose in life. And this purpose gives you a purpose in life that you can do anywhere in the world that you want to live. That's really the whole focus of that certification program. And it's a good system because it's intuitive to the retiree. It's intuitive to the vet. It's all using their military methods that they already learned. They're just applying it to the government process. And so it makes sense. So for me, that's really the twofold for the certification process. And I haven't had retirees come on board to do that certification, but I really haven't advertised that aspect of it. But whenever somebody says, hey, look, man, I just want to retire, we're going to go travel the world. We're going to sit on the beach. We're going to go to Cancun, whatever, chill out for the rest of my life. That may work for a few months or a year, but at a certain point, they're going to need something out of life to look forward to. I mean, it's just in their blood. This is the perfect job. Grab a laptop, make a couple extra bucks, advertise your own entrepreneur business using my methodology. And that's kind of the long-term focus for that certification program. Then I could hire them to do their own. It'd be almost like a franchise type thing where, hey, here's the method. You're out there anywhere you want to live, making extra cash. I mean, May not be full-time money, but at least it's play money for you.
Well, that sounds outstanding to me. I'll tell you, I think sitting on the beach with a laptop sounds really awesome.
Helping vets at the same time, right?
Exactly. What would you say the one most important thing is that you learned since starting your business that you can share with future veteran business owners?
Trying to outline the total cost, because I really haven't found any one document that actually helps you do that. Really, the one most important piece is money coming in and money going out. Ultimately, what happens to a lot of us that start up is when you start getting into the annual dues for your domain name, the annual dues for your website, any extras that you put on your website, if you're doing video programs, who's hosting it, all of these decisions cost money. It's a shocker because a lot of times in the military, before you give your ID card up, everything's free. The day you give your ID card up, everything costs money. And, you get somewhat offended by that initially, but at a certain point, you're looking at it going, well, everybody's basically got to make a living because it's capitalism. Okay. You're in a capitalist society. For me, the most important piece was track everything that's going out, maintain that, monitor that, and then cancel things that aren't working. Give it a month or two. If it's not working, cancel it, try something else. And then what's your pricing for your service? Because you have to have a service that you're bringing money in with. And people are going to have to pay you for it. You can't do everything for free. And a lot of people don't value a lot of the free stuff. But at a certain point, you're going to have to charge because you got to pay your bills. Because that website, the CPA, even the mass email, constant contact, all that kind of stuff, it all costs money. So you got to pay for that. Now, what's the money coming in and what's the money going out? And what's the in-between profit? If you can track that, then you can move forward. But to me, that's literally the most important. I know that may sound basic, but it's very difficult when you're getting out and you're never really been taught to focus on money. Other than in the government, we just spend it, right? I mean, by the end of every year, we spend money. And if you got extra money in your organization, you spend it. You have to spend it. So it's spend. It's not really managing that type of money and saving and trying to be a profitable company. It's really, here's your budget, spend all of it by the end of the year. When you get out and you're an entrepreneur, you got to manage all that and maintain some strategy with it. If you're tracking all that, that's the best way to do it. That's probably the most important piece that I would say that somebody would have to identify.
Yeah, I think you're right. And there's so many different things there, too, that people probably don't even think of, like you said, because they're not taught to think of those things. I mean, not only is it, do you buy a building? Do you rent a building? It's the electric, the internet, office furniture. It almost sounds better to like, hey, have a business online and you can avoid a whole lot of that stuff. But then still there's email marketing and there's website. There's just item after item that is just going to be like pouring out of a water can, and got to make sure you don't waste it all.
When I was retiring from the military, what I didn't do at the time was sit down and say, how much is this literally going to cost me on a monthly basis? I put a list together that is just a beginning list of stuff. For instance, Google Business. That's where you kind of get your domain emails, right? And they have a lot of different apps. It's all focused on business. That's going to cost you money every month. Your domain name, your web page, your logo, business cards, your 800 number, PayPal. I mean, how are people going to pay you? I mean, this is where the business plan comes in, but a lot of us aren't taught to ever write a business plan. We kind of think more in an outline format. And so, if you list all of this stuff, hey, how are people going to call you? 1-800 number, or are they going to use your own cell phone? How are people going to mail you information? If you're an internet-based business, I got to get a mailbox. Well, where are you going to get a mailbox? Are you going to use your home, or are you going to use the UPS store or the post office box? Well, the challenge is a lot of places online don't want or won't allow a P.O. box. They actually have to have a physical address. And so you have to either use your own or a UPS box. That's cost you every year. Better Business Bureau in Virginia, they just switched it. It used to be monthly fees. Now it's an annual fee. That kind of thing, to me, you really have to outline. And what's interesting is the majority of people I talk to who want to start up their own company haven't done that, don't even know they need to do that. There's no check the block piece. There's no one sitting down going, hey, what's this? What's that? What's this? Let's calculate that. If they don't do it, then they're going to have to actually do it as they're running their business, and it's a little too late to catch up. I was just lucky enough that I kind of put all that stuff together gradually over time. If I just started tomorrow on a business, that would be all the stuff that I would have to think about and the cost that comes with it. I mean, you're talking photos that you use on your webpage. If you go to Shutterstock, those photos are like $70. Videos are $70. I mean, it's expensive.
That was really a great list of items. I think that's so helpful for a transitioning veteran that, might want to start up the business. For you particularly, where do you think you find yourself in 3 to 5 years from now?
I'm hoping that I can be part of I call it a new movement for transition assistance. That service, I think, provides a valuable assistance to veterans. The Career One-Stops and Department of Labor with the DVOPs and livers, they do a fantastic job for those vets that are already out. Hopefully this method gets pushed into that arena, because to me, what we've been doing for many years is somewhat, we could label it insanity, because it's the same thing we've been doing, hoping for a different outcome. I got out in 2007, and I know guys who are getting out this month. And it's still kind of the same conversations. I'm like, let's try something completely different. Let's flip it 180 degrees and translate the civilian process into military terms and see if that works. And as unfamiliar as that may be, it's something different. And hopefully this method gets pushed into that arena to actually help. I truly believe that'll help. And I'm really hoping that eventually I can have kind of a global network of certified battlefield resume writers or resume coaches, employment coaches, who use the methodology wherever they want to live, but they not only are sitting there with a laptop on the beach, but they can also help do briefings and workshops to the military organizations. We haven't talked about spouses, but that's a critical piece to this whole thing. And to me, having been married since I was in high school, seeing my wife came in when I was an E1, I don't know why she would marry an E1. She didn't know any better back then, right? So we got married, and she went through the entire military with me, and then now she's still with me. God help her, but Lord have mercy, man. I'm telling you, they need help. This method helps them as well, because what it does is it partners them with their husband. It's a collective effort, because, they don't learn the military methods. They know some of it, but not a lot of it. It's not translated for them. And they're kind of stuck, especially if they bounced around overseas a lot, because then they come back to the States. They're worse off than the vet. The vet at least has some experience that can be transferred into the federal government. Most of the spouses have to start over again, because they've went from banking to dental to hospital to PX. They just have a myriad of experiences that they now have to try to figure out how to put together to have some resemblance of a career. So for me, where you hit the mark with that is at the company, not at the transition program. To me, that transition assistance program is the springboard to jump out. This is where you get, what are your questions? We're getting you out. You have to have your resume. So they're confirming now you got to have your resume a year out or whatever it is. We're going to bring in companies. We're going to bring in federal government. We're going to bring in whoever to help that transition. I wish I would have had mine a little earlier than that, because what I've seen more times than not is if I talk to somebody 2 to 3 years out and they tell me the time frame that they're looking at, then I can say, again, what's your target? What types of positions are you looking at? And then I focus them on strategies to be competitive. And those strategies are not short-term strategies. I mean, you can't finish those in 6 months or a year. Those strategies are, hey, look, if you're going to get out in 3 or 4 years, let's plan on getting you your degree, at least at a minimum, getting your ACE transcripts accredited for a degree, and hopefully it's a bachelor's degree. Let's get that. Let's get you into project management so you can get a project manager certification, a PMP certification. If this is a career you want to get into, then let's figure out what those certifications are that they're looking at right now. And it's probably going to take you a few years to actually get those. So let's get you ready to transition by giving you the opportunities to get these. When you're a year out, you're on the downward slope. I mean, it's very difficult to catch up at that point. My goal is to try to get in ahead of time, have the company commanders, battalion or brigade commanders say, hey, Bruce or Battlefield Resumes, we need you to come in, give a workshop. This is the career focus. Let's move. What's the strategy to get these guys successful over the next so many years?
Bruce, I think that's fantastic. To me, that vision of things that you can accomplish to help them be more successful before they get out, not when they jump off. The whole part about the spouses and how important it is for them. I've actually talked a lot about that myself because I just think that, they're part of the military too because they go on those deployments, they go overseas, they have to shoulder a lot while we're deployed. That means a lot that you or I would think about them as well. So I think you got some great vision, and I can certainly say that I think you're going to have a lot more success. If people want to talk to you, find out more about what you do, what's the best way that you would like to be contacted?
They can just email me at info at battlefieldresumes.com. That's probably the easiest way to contact me. I check that all the time. If you call me, I do have an 800 number, the 888-207-2716. Just leave a message on there because I do filter my messages out because of the telemarketing, even on the no-call list. The easiest way, though, is just to email me at info at battlefieldresumes.com.
Well, Bruce, I wanted to say thank you so much. You gave more information today that goes well beyond a veteran trying to start a business, because that's really what this is about. What do they need to know? What are the things that they haven't thought of? How can we help them not make the same mistakes that maybe we've made already? But based on what you do and how you help veterans that are transitioning, there was just a wealth of information about what they need to do, even to just find a new career. The information was so valuable, and I appreciate it more than you can possibly imagine. I think it's going to help the veterans and even potentially the spouses or anyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it. Just so you know, most of my services, I give the 15% discount for vets. But not only vets, I actually give the discount for anybody who's ever had a family member who served in the U.S. military. And I'll tell you the reason why I do that. And that's because I have two kids. My daughter is in the military, fantastic, combat medic, and my son wanted to. But right before he graduated high school, he broke his arm and they put a metal stent in his arm. And when he went to the recruiter, they said, well, you can't come in if you have any metal in your body. And I'm like, where in the world did that come from? So he couldn't go in. But that guy is one of the most patriotic guys I've ever been around. And not just because he's my son. He's just very, very patriotic. And there's so many people like him who may or may not have the ability to go in the service. Life happens. They may not be their time, but they're still patriotic. So, for me, I looked at it and said, if you are a U.S. citizen and you have ever had anybody who served in the U.S. military in your family ever, I'm going to give you that veteran discount because that's what it's all about. Because, the spouse, they don't serve. They're not vets, but they really did serve some hard time too, a lot of them. The kids, same thing, right? That's how I feel, and that's what I've done, and it means a lot, and that's what I do. I give them that discount.
In this episode with Bruce, we heard some great advice you can take advantage of on your own entrepreneur journey. Networking is essential to starting a business and helps in so many ways, like getting those questions answered by those that have been there. The main steps for success are determining your target, getting your process down, and figuring out your pricing for your product or service. Outline the total cost of the business, money going out and money coming in, and so much more.
The Veteran Connections podcast provides advice from veterans for veterans. A lot of people like you and me that have been through the military have had the same thoughts and a lot of the same questions. We may have even had the exact same struggle. I hope you find some answers as you go on this Veteran Connections journey with me, where we will learn, explore, and get answers to your questions. Another great resource for veterans wanting to start their own business is the Small Business Administration. If you need more information or want assistance implementing one of the things you learned about today, you can contact me. I can teach you techniques and strategies to help you connect and network in the business community so you can reach your personal, professional goals. Email me at petebloom@solvability.com and let me know how I can help you. I hope that you have enjoyed this podcast episode, and if you have a burning question that you would like to get answered by an expert veteran business owner about starting your own business, go ahead and email me. I will answer it in a future episode. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to the Veteran Connections podcast. Our sponsor, Solvability, helps small businesses win federal contracts. Visit our website at solvability.com to learn how to be more competitive and more profitable in federal contracting. We'll be back with another great podcast next week.